Hi, this video is a homily of Deacon Chuck, and he gave the homily for Sunday the 19th. Actually did it at the vigil on the 18th, and it's from Matthew 13. That gospel gets repeated on July 27th for daily mass, and this is what that gospel is. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus proposed another parable to the crowd, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be likened to a man who sowed good seed in his field. While everyone was asleep, his enemy came and sowed weeds all throughout the wheat, and then went off. When the crop grew and bore fruit, the weeds appeared as well. The slaves of the householder came to him and said, 'Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where have all the weeds come from?' He answered, 'An enemy has done this.' And his slave said to him, 'Do you want us to go and pull them up?' He replied, 'No, if you pull up the weeds, you might uproot the wheat along with them. Let them grow together until harvest. Then at harvest time, I will say to the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles for burning, but gather the wheat into my barn.'" The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. And the extra parable with it is the kingdom of heaven like a mustard seed. And so Deacon will be covering a little bit of that as well. And the kingdom of heaven like yeast. Okay, Deacon Chuck, it's yours.
In today's gospel from St. Matthew, Jesus is revealing through parables the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. And when I hear that phrase, kingdom of heaven, what first pops into my mind is that glorious kingdom where God and all the saints and angels are in eternal happiness forever. But in the gospel reading today, Jesus is challenging us to think more broadly about what that phrase, the kingdom of heaven, means. And he's telling us that the kingdom of heaven is already here. It's already here on earth. It's already being unfolded in mysterious ways in the midst of his disciples and in our midst too. And each parable is meant to reveal something new, some new dimension of the kingdom of heaven to his disciples. And sometimes he wants us to get out of the parable what our role in that kingdom might be. A few Sundays ago, we heard, and we all know very well, the parable of the sower. And we also heard today the parable of the wheat and the weeds. So Jesus is using yet another farming scenario to teach us about the kingdom of heaven. What Jesus is telling us today is that the church is always going to have to contend with evil. Good and evil, Jesus is telling us, will coexist until the end of time. The weeds that Jesus refers to in the gospel today are called darnel, which is a plant that grows in Palestine. And when it's growing, when it's young, it's almost indistinguishable from wheat. It's not until the fruit, the seed head, comes out that one can distinguish between a wheat plant and a darnel plant. And Jesus is telling us that if we leave that wheat and that darnel to grow together, their weeds will become intertwined. And that's exactly why Jesus discourages his disciples in the parable from going and pulling up those weeds, because in doing so, they may end up damaging the wheat. The fathers of the church understood the weeds to mean those in our church, those who share our faith, who sow errors, heretics, schismatics, those who do not follow the doctrine of the church. We might think today of someone who shares our faith, but who still thinks it's okay to kill unborn children. Jesus, by telling in the parable, when the master says to the workers, leave the wheat and the weeds to grow together, what is he trying to tell us? He's trying to tell us to be patient with those who are in error, to let him be the one who distinguishes between the wheat and the darnel. The lesson for us is be patient with those in error. We can't foster their errors, but we have to be patient with them. In fact, in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus himself gives us explicit instructions on how we should correct each other as Christians. So if someone is in error, we should try to correct them. But Jesus is reminding us that he is the ultimate judge. And at the end of time, there will be a final reckoning when each will reap the reward that he has earned. But if the kingdom of heaven is really unfolding here on earth, if it is really here amidst us, why do we have to contend with evil at all? Well, the answer is that the kingdom is not unfolding on completely neutral ground, with nothing opposing it. And in the gospel of the parable of the sower, and in the gospel today, the parable of the wheat and the weeds, Jesus is reminding us that the source of that evil is Satan and his minions, and that they are actively trying to oppose the kingdom of heaven. In the parable, the workers are like, Master, where did these wheat seeds come from? How did they get in there? Jesus tells his disciples that Satan put them there. Jesus, in these Gospels and many Gospels, warns us about Satan, and we ignore those warnings at our own spiritual peril. And there's another reading in the book of Wisdom where God tells us that he rebukes temerity. What does that? It's not a word we hear a lot. Temerity. What does that mean? Temerity is reckless disregard for danger. Every day, whether we like it or not, whether we want to or not, we engage in spiritual battle with Satan. And like a U.S. soldier who goes into a war zone and doesn't put on his helmet and his body armor, doesn't keep his weapon clean, doesn't carry it locked and loaded when he goes out on patrol, and therefore risks getting himself killed. If we do not put on the armor of faith, if we do not pick up our weapons of prayer, especially one of the most powerful weapons, the Holy Rosary, then we risk going into spiritual battle unprepared. And we risk Satan creeping into our lives and choking off our spiritual life. We don't have to live in fear. We know that Jesus has already won the victory over sin and death. And we have St. Michael, the archangel, constantly, forever in supernatural battle against Satan and his minions. He is constantly battling their wickedness to protect us. But we have to be vigilant as individuals, as a church. A little bit farther on in Matthew's Gospel, in fact, just the next few verses, we would read about the parable of the yeast and the dough. Jesus reveals another dimension of the kingdom of heaven.